speaker. This time I have chosen a little bit of a almost philosophical but rather overarching topic. It's called Perspectives on Structures and Life, and I will tell you in just a little bit in a moment what I mean by this. Let me just see that I have to arrange my stuff here a little bit. Maybe, yeah, okay, that's fine. So life, perspectives on structures of life. Life underlies, as we all know, or we assume, a fundamental organizing principle that governs how living systems structure themselves. Across all scales of biological organization, structure is not only a part of life structures or emerged life, but also engineering, of course. I think it plays an important role in all different kinds of engineering parts. So this architectural framework reveals that life is not randomly organized, but follows specific design principles that ensure stability, function, and evolutionary adaptability. So we are dealing with different scales, from the molecular level to entire ecosystems and living systems. They exhibit a hierarchical organization characterized by emergent properties, physical principles, and mathematical patterns. One of those fundamental principles is in biology, also in engineering, tensegrity, which we will also, together with self-assembly, look into more in detail. So let's start this. This is how it's organized. I will talk about what structure, then I will go into architecture, biological structure, philosophy, a little bit at least, systems theory, and at the end, I will talk about tensegrity, which is a framework of balanced forces in life's architecture. I'll let you know what I mean by this. Self-assembly, which is connected to tensegrity. And at the end, I will come up with a little bit of a synthesis and common themes, structure as key to life and engineering. So I hope this sounds exciting enough. And let's start to talk about structure, introduction to structure. It is a fundamental concept that threads through many disciplines. It shapes how we understand the organization and as well dynamics of life. So organization and dynamics of life is related to structure. What is structure? It's a good question. In the broader sense, structure refers to the arrangement and interrelation of parts within a complex whole. It denotes an organized pattern, whether physical components of a building, hierarchy of a living organism, or even the logical framework of a theory that gives form and stability to something. So form and stability comes from structure. Every structure has both composition, its parts, and form, the way those parts fit together. Sounds logical, but we have to point it out, of course. Composition and form. Critically, structure is associated with function and behavior. How something is structured often determines what it does. So an overarching principle is that structure determines function. Structure determines function. How something is arranged allows it to perform a specific task, a specific job, and which is similar in engineering and design as well as in biology. The performance of a system critically depends on its structural organization. So now we look at a little bit the whole framework of scales that we're talking about, from atoms via cells and tissues and body systems. The body skeleton is also a structure, of course, but also a population community as well as the ecosystem and the biosphere. So structure is a fundamental concept. It threads through many disciplines, shaping how we understand the organization and also the dynamics of life, as I pointed out. We can talk about engineered frameworks that shelter human activities, such as architecture, that comes up here in the ecosystem part, but also the molecular architectures driving biology. Structures provides form, stability, and function, as we can see in this slide, from the molecular level to entire ecosystem. Living systems exhibit a hierarchical organization characterized by emergent properties, which we will look into in just a little. So structure provides form, stability, and function. So let's jump into architecture and have a little bit seeing it from the architectural side, structural form and function in life. Architecture is the discipline of designing structures that support human life and activity. It's a very general way of saying this. So architecture is not only about houses and buildings and apartments. So as a universal law, form ever follows function, and this is the law pervading all things organic and inorganic, that life is recognizable in its expression. In other words, good architectural design mirrors rule also evident in nature, the structure of an entity which is intimately linked to what it does, its function. This has led many architects to draw inspiration from nature and biological structures, which we will look into. Here we can see the Eiffel Tower, a striking example. The Eiffel Tower, whose iron lattice work, I think you have all been there, is our dear Sandrine. I think she should be here, no? Anyway, she will come. She knows the Eiffel Tower in France. So this iron lattice work was informed by the internal structure of the human femur, the thigh bone. The tower's curved base and web of struts mirror, therefore, the femur's trabecula, tiny struts of bone aligned on stress lines. Stress lines, that's important, allowing it thereby to withstand wind forces with minimal amount of material. This is how it looks like. So it's a biomimetic design, employs hierarchical structure, nested trusses in 3 levels, much like this natural system. And by this, achieving extraordinary stiffness and stability. So architecture itself does not only provide metaphors for life structures, but also borrows directly nature's structural solutions. For example, from termite-inspired climate control in buildings, such as this Eastgate Center in Harare, Zimbabwe. It uses chimney-like vents top of the building, inspired by termite mounds for passive cooling, or also shell-like or mushroom-like roofs and tree-like supports in biomorphic design that we can see here. And also, this is a very interesting example, Bosco Verticale in Milano, in Italy. It is the vertical forest is translated. It is a building in Milano with a vegetation facade. There are over 900 trees, 500 shrubs, and 1,100 perennial plants. And those help to combat CO2 or smog in the city, which sustains life. It also attracts insects and thereby creating a new life-supporting ecosystem. So this is ecosystem biomimicry. Around 20,000 kilos of carbon are converted each year. So we were talking about sustaining life in the city. To sustain life is to build structure. Yeah, and let's jump further. Biological structure. Let's look into the this image that we have already seen. So, in biology, the connection between structure and life is intimate and also profound. Life is built hierarchically, as we can see here. Simple molecules self-organize into complex macromolecules. If we start here at the left top here, they assemble into cells. They self-assemble into cells, which is the basic structural and functional units of all life. Cells themselves they form tissues and organs. They integrate into whole organisms, and organisms populate ecosystem, and at the end into a biosphere. So at every level of this hierarchy, structure underpins function. For example, the three-dimensional shape of a protein dictates how it interacts with other molecules. Let's have a look. How it interacts with other molecules in the cell. So, slight change in a protein structure. We are talking. This is a exemplary protein structure. We are talking about primary, secondary, and tertiary structure, even ternary structure. So it's a highly complex and hierarchical molecule when we're talking about proteins. So a slightly change in the protein's structure can render it non-functional or even harmful, which underscores, of course, that in biology, structure and function are inseparably. The same thing goes for the double helix structure. That means of DNA. It's not just beautiful, it is also crucial for storing genetic information, and that it's being copied accurately. In this way, molecular architectures literally encode life's processes. Moving up in scale, the structural designs of cells and organisms has evolved to serve specific functions. So if we look at the cell here, it's a schematic description of the organization of actin and microtubule cytoskeletons inside a single cell. So inside each cell, an organized framework called the cytoskeleton provides shape through its structure, and it facilitates transport, and much similar to buildings' girders and beams. Those cellular scaffolds are dynamic. They remodel the cell as the cell moves, divides, or responds to stimuli. Form and function are those tightly interwoven. If you alter the function, if you alter the structure, you will alter the function. So experiments have also shown that changing a cell's shape can influence which genes it activates, causing flattened cells to grow and round cells to initiate programmed death. So life leverages this structural plasticity to adapt and also evolve. I could go into the details here, but I think what we can see is the spindles here at each end during cell division. So again, at the larger scale, entire communities or organisms create structure networks that sustain life. We have been talking about this before. An ecosystem can be defined as a structural and functional unit of ecology where living organisms interact with each other and the surrounding environment. The spatial structural arrangements of organisms in an ecosystem, let's say, for example, the vertical layers of a rainforest or the trophic levels in a food web determines how energy flows and the nutrient cycle itself. So this is the structure of this is the food chain, as we can see in this slide. And so the structure of the ecosystems and the food chain, as well as their physical environment, underlies the function, structure, and resilience of the ecosystem. Alter the structure and you alter the function. So I'm jumping wildly between different kinds of fields here. So let's have a quick look at philosophy with respect to structure. I've been thinking about metaphysical and epistemological reflections. So let's start with the metaphysical reflections on structure. In general, philosophers have long explored the questions concerning what structure really is and what it means. In metaphysics, structure often bridges the gap between inert matter and living form, between inert matter and living form. Aristotle, as this is the guy in this figure, he thought that every physical entity is a compound of matter and form. In the case of living beings, he thought that the soul is the form of the body. By this view, an organism's soul is not a mystical substance, but rather the organizing principle, the structured arrangement of matter. So the soul structures matter. Life is embedded in structure, as you can see here at the bottom. If we move on to the epistemological reflection on structure, epistemologically, structure also shapes how we know and explain life, the knowledge itself. Scientific knowledge progresses often by uncovering structural patterns. We can think about the periodic table as we see here in this slide, which is the structured orders of elements, the linear taxonomic tree organizing living species, or the discovery of DNA's double helix, providing insight to the structural insight into heredity. There is another technology philosopher, Thomas Kuhn, who coined this famous phrase, structure of scientific revolutions. He even suggested that our understanding itself is structure. So recognizing structural pattern can be a sort of a eureka moment. For example, seeing the whole is greater than the sum of its parts is a kind of realization that the mere analysis of pieces, be it neurons or be it genes, is not enough. One must grasp the emergent organization, and we can look into that a little bit. So, metaphysically, this raises the idea that organizing principle could be universal. Is there a common structural logic underlying all living systems? We have, before I go into the next slide, there's a biologist, Donald Ingbert. He thinks that maintenance of pattern and architecture is life itself. Since with death, he argues that death is the loss of structural organization. And of course, he is right with at least the second part. So, in general, I would like to conclude, philosophy contributes a critical lens. It asks us to consider structure as both the underlying fabric of reality and also the scaffold of our understanding of reality. So, to comprehend life in either the abstract or the concrete sense, we must appreciate the structures that constitute it, sustain it, and give it forms. This is indeed very important if we want to look into this at a little bit deeper level. So, as I said, I will be freely jumping between different fields. So let's look into this systems theory, interconnected wholes and emergence. So this provides a framework for understanding life as an integrated web of relationships, emphasizing structure at the level of whole systems, So traditionally, science has been focusing on isolating parts, but that might be insufficient for living organisms. which exhibit phenomena not resolvable into local events, systems of various order not understandable by investigations of their parts in isolation only. So that is what we're dealing when we're thinking about systems and system theory. So this system theory itself introduces concepts like hierarchical levels and modularity, as we can see in this this image, 3 separate broadcast domains, just as an example. Complex systems, hierarchical levels and modularity. So hierarchical levels allows for emergent properties at each level. For example, metabolism. We can see different things here. We have different networks, genetic, molecular, cellular, organ networks, evolution, and population genetics inside. So, for example, emergent properties at each level, as I said. For example, metabolism emerges at the cell level, consciousness at the organism level, cooperation at the community level. So it provides resilience. If one module fails, the system can often reconfigure around it. The system of network topology in ecology or metabolism, similarly, they show that certain structure patterns, for example, food web connectivity or metabolic network, make life robust to perturbations. Ultimately, systems theory offers a holistic perspective. Life is a system of systems. Remember hierarchy, as I said. So life is a system of systems. System theory resonates with the idea that structures is not just the physical scaffold, but also the pattern of interactions. Yeah. Now we are moving forward to something very interesting, that is tensegrity. I really like that word, and I also like that field. A framework of balanced forces in life's architecture. This is one of the most promising concepts of describing life's architecture. It's a quite remarkable concept. It's linking structure and life. So tensegrity is short for tensional integrity. It describes an architecture system in which structures stabilize themselves by balancing the counteracting forces of compression and tension. It gives shape and strength of form. So in a classic tensegrity structure, rigid elements like struts or rods do not directly touch, but are held in place by a continuous network of tensile elements like cables or strings. So the entire structure is pervaded by tension, and mechanical stresses are distributed holistically. If one part is loaded, the rest of the structure adjusts to balance it. So we will look into this. So tensegrity system is a system of in a stable self-equilibrated state comprising a continuous set of compressed components inside a continuum of tensioned components. That is one definition, actually, from Mr. René Motro in Italy, I think it is. A little bit more poetically, according to Richard Buckminster Fuller, who is one of the who started to work on tensegrity, he says tensegrity describes elements of compression in a sea of tension. Now, isn't that beautiful? And this is a tensegrity structure that you can see here. I will show you a little bit more about this in just a moment. So tensegrity is tension and integrity, islands of compression floating in a balanced sea of tension, such as this sculpture by Kenneth Nelson. So let's look into this a little bit more in detail here. As you can see, the stiff rods are connected with elastic cables or strings. So you have compression at each end of the rigid rods, and you have tension in the cables, so this framework is a framework of balanced forces, and this framework of balanced forces, tension and compression, is also something we can find in life's architecture. For example, the spine. Just to take one example, it's the structure of tensegrity that we have in the superficial plane, as well as the rotateur and the multifundus. I will not go into the details here so much, but just pointing out that there have been many tensegrity models built to represent the pelvis, the vertical spine, the tensegrity leg, or as well as a foot, and also the whole human being. And one very interesting thing is the cellular tensegrity model. The cytoskeleton, we mentioned the cytoskeleton before, of a single cell, is comprised of a continuous network of tensile actin filaments. Those are the yellow lines here, and isolated microtubule struts. Those are the green ones. The cytoskeleton is linked to the extracellular matrix via focal adhesion molecular clusters, or you call it actually focal points, as you see here. This is basically a cell on a surface, right? So, and this here, bottom right, is a schematic representation of the complementary force balance between tension, that's FM here, FMF, MF is the microfilaments, in actin microfilaments, and T is the microtubule. So we can have at each point here the focal adhesion point is FA at the bottom, so we can make a force balance here at each of those points in the tensegrity model. And again, as I said, it also means that you can press it, right? You can press a tensegrity structure like this because it balances out the impact, the structure itself. So in a larger sense, tensegrity as a perspective reinforces a profound concept. Life builds stable structures, not by rigid permanence, but by dynamic equilibrium. That is what we see in for example, this picture. So let's move on. Self-assembly is the spontaneous structural organization in nature and technology. And if tensegrity explains how stable structures maintain themselves, self-assembly is the field. It explains how complex structures can form by themselves. And so self-assembly is the process by which components, it can be molecules, but also larger units, spontaneously organized into ordered structures without external direction. It can be external direction sometimes, but that's a different story. So it has been called the fundamental principle which generates structural organization on all scales, from molecules to galaxies. Self-assembly is nature's way of building complexity from the bottom up. The key ingredients are simple: numerous parts that can move, kinetic energy, and interact locally, plus the driving force of energy minimization. We are always looking for energy minima in a self-assembling system. So through those countless local interactions between numerous parts, order emerge. A classical biological example is the lipid bilayer membranes of cells, or also the lipids, the self-assembly of lipids into vesicles. The structure of a lipid bilayer membrane and phospholipids is shown in this slide. And also, let's see, macroscopically, what we can see here is macroscopic magnetic self-assembly of centimeter-sized magnetic polymeric spheres. And as you can see, if we change turbulence, we can alter the interaction or the disturbing energy, as it is called, between the spheres, and they spontaneously self-assemble into structures. Structure is the key word, so tensegrity and self-assembly. In general, understanding self-assembly does not only illuminates how life might have arisen and how it operates at nano to macro scales, but it also provides an interdisciplinary toolkit to mimic life's construction strategies in technology and to appreciate the universality of structure in the cosmos. So we are coming slowly to the end. I will present a little bit, shortly at least, sort of a synthesis and common themes. Structure as the key to life, and I might add structure is also the key to engineering. Materials engineering, we can think about many examples there. Metamaterials, for example, is a good example. Now, if we look at this conclusion here, so across the fields that we've been looking at, architecture, biology, philosophy, systems, science, and beyond, structure emerges as a key to life's complexity. So life can be viewed as a grand architecture, physical and conceptual, shaped by both purpose and chance, from the literal architecture of bones and habitats to the molecular architecture of cells and the abstract architectures of ideas. Structure provides the stage on which the drama of life unfolds, if I may put it in a little bit poetic way. So by synthesizing insights from multiple disciplines, we move towards a holistic understanding of living structure, one that appreciates both the solid framework of form and the fluid dynamics of life's processes. So embracing these common themes does not only deepen scientific understanding, but also guides practical innovation in building systems. It might be cities, it might be ecosystem or organizations or materials or machines that harmonize with life's enduring structural principles. That sounds, I like that last phrase, that harmonize with life's enduring structural principles. And therefore, with this, I would like to conclude and thank you very much for your kind attention.